Hello and welcome to the Sales Leaders series. I'm your host, Freddie, where I'll be gathering B2B SaaS sales leaders from across the world to answer 5 short, topical B2B SaaS sales questions. These questions are going to be the same each week, bar one, giving you insight and different perspectives into how top performers within the industry think, as well as actionable advice you guys can use in your own selling careers. Our guest today is Cliff Simon. Cliff has over 13 years of experience, broad technology experience. He's anchored go-to-market teams across the SaaS and service industries. Having worked in both Fortune 20 and high-growth startups, Cliff prefers the fast pace and ability to deliver significant impact that comes from working in the startup space. Cliff is an advisor and fractional executive for several high-growth startups, where he utilizes his expertise in all things go-to-market, as well as RevOps. He's an active leader in go-to-market communities as well, such as Pavilion and Rev Genius. Cliff, welcome to Sales Leaders series. It's great to have you on.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate the time.
So the way this is going to work is I'm going to ask you 5 very short, simple questions, 4 of which we ask all of our guests on the Sales Leaders series. And then the last one is a varied question which has been left by our previous guest. Okay. It's really simple as that. How does that sound?
Sounds wonderful. Let's go for it.
Perfect. Let's just jump straight into it. So the first question is, when thinking about how you've grown revenue over those 13 years, is there one thing or maybe a couple sort of ways of thinking, frameworks that you would pinpoint that's made the biggest difference to you and your teams in growing that revenue?
Yeah, I think especially like in the startup space, right? You have to pin everything back to your customer acquisition costs and your lifetime value. Right now, especially given the economic situation and the recession, there's some additional metrics that people are looking at. What's your burn rate? What is the ratio of your CAC to LTV specifically over the last quarter to 3 quarters? So that way you can start following those trend lines. I'm very data-driven in my approach, right? I prefer a waterfall methodology to forecasting. So I take all of the data and use that to roll everything back up from the number. So that way we can understand what it's going to take for every department to go and hit their OKRs and to drive forward the metrics that we need. And then start using those numbers and benchmarks to start driving actions into efficiency. Right? How can I get 1%, 2%, 3% better at each of those conversion rates across the client's buying journey?
Makes sense. And when focusing on all of those different aspects, I guess, along the whole sales funnel, do you ever find it hard to, I guess, align everyone on the, I guess, a couple things, especially obviously if you want to focus on making sure that you're optimizing a specific, I guess, metric, with so many things to focus on? How do you just sort of narrow that down? Does that make sense?
Yeah, there's going to obviously be departmental ownership for the specific metrics, but I think as a whole, from a company perspective, that comes from the top. If the executive team, the first team is aligned, it makes it a lot easier for mid-level management and for the rank and file to come in line and do what they have to do. And give people enough information so that they can feel ownership and agency in the process. And let them understand the reasoning as to why we're trying to accomplish these things, right? We can't just tell people to go do things. They have to have that internal drive too.
Yeah, it makes sense. It's probably
and over company wide.
Yeah. Let's just jump straight into the second question. What is the biggest challenge you and I guess your selling teams are currently facing, especially going into 2023 with so much uncertainty? And how are you currently tackling them, or how are you looking towards, I guess, tackling them over the next year?
Yeah, I think the biggest problem that a lot of folks are facing right now is elongated sales cycles and more scrutiny in the sales process. For us, right, our sales process over the last 2 years here at Caribbean has been like a 30-day, sometimes sub 30, and we saw it stretch out a little bit. And I think that's going to continue to happen. Is the financial teams are getting far more involved. Every dollar being spent is being scrutinized. Does this either help us as a company, right, acquire more clients? Does this help us do that in an efficient manner anywhere across the process, or does it help me grow my LTV? If it's not doing one of those three things, then I don't know if it's something I need to be spending money on. Okay.
Yeah, makes sense. Makes sense. And I think that's probably, I've definitely seen it in my efforts, especially over the last couple of months, with everything's going, that is the case. It's hard to get to those decision makers. You've got to be really, really super clear on, why are we talking? What is the value that you're actually bringing? Is there anything that any frameworks or tips that you guys use in your teams to make sure that you are engaging those important stakeholders like the CFO on these important topics more effectively now, obviously, with everything going on?
And it's got to start from the beginning, right? Understanding, well, on when you're talking to a customer, going through the process with them, right? Had they thought something like this before? Is this the first time they've evaluated software or a service or what have you? And understanding where they're coming from and who else is involved in that process. When do they get involved in that process? What are the differentiators in the criteria in the decision-making process? And walking alongside as a partner to understand those things, I think is really important. You should be doing that from the very beginning of your sales cycle once you know that someone's interested in taking a look at you seriously.
Yeah, I guess that gives a real good indication of the level of intent on their side as well, which is,
sure.
I think,
where's the urgency? Are they actually going to be moving on something like this? Or are they just going through the rote exercise of evaluating you because they know they have to evaluate 3 or 4 options in order to make it look like they're doing your job? Sure.
Exactly. Yeah, no, very, very topical. Third question, let's go straight into it. What do you think will be the most important factor determining success, especially in B2B software sales, over the next year, especially with everything going on, and also looking over the next 5 years?
Over the next year, I think the two things that are going to make the biggest difference are enablement on the sales side, right? So are you actually surfacing up the right data for your sales team so they can focus their time and energy on the accounts that are most likely to close, on the appropriate ICP, on the correct personas, right? If you can surface that up and help them understand what it looks like when a company typically buys from you, you can start matching that blueprint up against what you're seeing in the day-to-day. And if things are lining up great, awesome, you're on the right track. But if things aren't and you're getting misalignment, now you can start looking for those red flags, saying, well, the typical deal for us looks like X, but this is X minus 2. Right? Or there's a couple variables missing here that we don't typically have. Let's go find out what those are to make sure that we're moving this along appropriately. So from an enablement perspective, I think that's highly important. On the other side, just from a company perspective, to continue to grow revenue, there's going to have to be a renewed focus. And I think you're already seeing a lot of this chatter in the space on the CS function. I think CS far too long has been seen as like the redheaded stepchild, right? Marketing and sales gets all the glitz and the glory, but 60, 70, 80% of your revenue sometimes ends up coming from your client renewals and your upsells and cross-sells. You need to be able to really focus in there. It's a lot easier to hold on to an existing client than it is to go and try to get a new one. You already have them in the door. There is no CAC there, right? There's a cost of service, a cost of good, but it's usually significantly less than the cost to acquire a new customer. So hold on to the ones you have.
Yeah, makes sense. And I guess I was speaking to another leader as well earlier in the week, and they were talking about channel sales and you having successful customers as part of your business, and being able to go to those guys and get references, get referrals. It's going to be a massive driver for sales over the next year, I think.
Yeah, referrals is fantastic. For us, I think we drive like 85% of our business through word of mouth.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Happy clients refer other folks who sign up very quickly. So it's a powerful tool.
It is powerful. It's very powerful. Fourth question. You've been in sales for 13 years. And obviously I've been in sales a much less time than that, but it's an emotional career. There's lots of ups and downs. What has been the toughest moment in your career, in your sales career? How have you dealt with it? And based on obviously that experience, what advice would you give to others looking at your position as a certain goal? What advice would you give to those guys based on that experience?
Yeah, I think there was the one that probably cost or felt the worst and caught me off guard the most. I was working for a company back in the mid 2010s, I think like 2015, 2016. And working my butt off, thought things were going really well. And they did a corporate restructuring and got rid of maybe 10% of the territories across the country based off of historical data. Had nothing to do with the quality or the competency of the existing rec in those territories. And I had a bunch of deals that were closing. I'm like, wait, why? We've got a great pipeline. What's going on?
Yeah.
Like, your territory has been eliminated. Like, this headcount's gone. Like, okay. So that, I think that one was the most surprising. But what it taught me and has continued to teach me in the sales side of things is that you're a number. You're only as good as your last quarter, and you need to be able to perform consistently. And sometimes, especially for folks who are getting laid off right now, like a door gets slammed shut, a door or window opens up somewhere else, and you end up going to the place you're meant to be. It's not everything in this world is up and to the right. And it's a very winding, circuitous path that many of us take to get to where we end up, right? I've been that sales rep that blew my number out of the water, and I was a sales rep that didn't hit quota and got laid off for it. I've also had the opportunity to build some really great high-power teams, and I've been a part of builds that didn't go well in the past. So you have to take all of those learned experiences, and that's what helps drive you forward as a leader eventually, right? Being able to understand and empathize, like, it's not easy. And you have to have sympathy for the folks that are going through layoffs and what have you right now. But at the end of the day, the next thing's always better because it has to be.
Yeah, makes sense. Well, and when you just to touch on that point, when you were a rep, and I guess not hitting that quota and not hitting those targets, is it more so you understanding what it takes to be successful based on what you know, how it feels not to be? Is that the biggest learning you would take from that, or would it be?
Sometimes it's just macroeconomic situations that you can't overcome, right? I've been in situations where I was working my tail off. I was setting more meetings than everybody else on the team. I had more activity than everybody else on the team. I was doing all of the gritty things right that you would expect for a rep to do. But at the end of the day, it didn't happen. And those things do occur. Sometimes the metrics don't line up, right? You can be working really, really hard and have a lot of action, but maybe it's not action in the right place, or maybe you're just hitting up against a brick wall. Sometimes those things happen and you have to move on to find a different place to be. It's the reality of the world.
Relative sales as well, especially, that's very up and down. Fifth and final question. This question was submitted by our previous guest, Jason George at Orvic. He's VP of Sales. And he's got a question for you, Cliff. There's a philosophical debate about sales is an art or sales is a science. If you were forced to pick one and only one, which one would you choose and why?
Sales is science. There's an art form to it, I would agree. But if I had to choose one, sales is science, because you have to be data driven. There's no way to scale without it being data driven. I think all too often, especially at like a seed stage or Series A, what happens is a company brings in a really charismatic salesperson. That person has been in the industry for a while. They've got great connections. They're wonderful at networking, but there's no adherence to process. There's no capturing of data. So when they try to scale that, you're trying to scale lightning that was captured in a bottle one time, right? For a moment, but it's gone. And you can't transfer that to other people. You need to actually have data that shows how to scale an act and go-to-market process. And I think that's why the science is important. It has to be data-driven. You have to have hypotheses. You have to test. And then you have to take the data from that test and reevaluate. Right? It's a living, breathing thing, but it is science.
Great answer. Great answer. Cliff, they're all the questions. It's been a pleasure, short but sweet.
Yeah,
I really appreciate
thank you.
the time.
Excellent. Great.
If any of you guys listening to the pod want some more information about Cliff, what he does, the Carabiner Group, any of the things that we talked about in this episode, there's going to be some resources and links down in the description below. Other than that, is there any final parting words you'd like to leave the audience with, Cliff?
Oh man, I feel like it's I remember it's Christmas time, so take some time off, recharge, enjoy the holiday, come back in the new year, get ready to hit that number.
Amen. It's been a pleasure, Cliff. Really appreciate it, and I'll see you guys next week.
Take care.